Life on Earth is astonishingly stubborn. In the roughly 3.7 billion years since it first appeared, it has been battered by asteroids, frozen into a global snowball, poisoned, starved, and cooked. And every single time, it has held on. Somewhere, something always survived and carried the whole story forward. That's the thread that connects the first microbe in the primordial sea to you, sitting here now. An unbroken chain, 3.7 billion years long, that has never once been severed. But it has come close, terrifyingly close. And there is one moment, one single chapter in the history of this planet when that chain very nearly snapped. When life came closer to being wiped from the earth entirely than at any other time before or since. It happened 252 million years ago, and it has a name that fits it perfectly: the Great Dying. Now, when most people think of mass extinction, they think of one event, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. And that was a catastrophe, no question. But here's the thing you need to understand from the start. The dinosaur extinction was not even close to the worst. The asteroid wiped out around 75% of species. Bad. But the Great Dying erased something like 96% of all marine species and around 70% of all land species. Nearly everything alive. Which means the event that ended the dinosaurs, the most famous apocalypse in our planet's history, was actually the milder disaster. The Great Dying was in a category all its own. So let me set the scene, because the world it destroyed was not the world you know. This was the very end of the Permian period, long before any dinosaur existed. All the land on Earth was fused into a single supercontinent, Pangaea, one vast mass surrounded by one vast ocean. And it was teeming with life, but life of a genuinely alien kind. The seas were dominated by the trilobites, those armoured, many-legged creatures that had scuttled across the seafloor for nearly 300 million years. One of the most successful groups of animals that has ever existed. There were vast reefs, ammonites, sea scorpions, strange early fish. And on land, the ancestors and relatives of mammals ruled. Creatures like the sail-backed predators and the tusked, burrowing plant-eaters. It was a thriving, complex, established world. And it was about to end. The question, of course, is, what could possibly kill 96% of everything? And the answer, the culprit that scientists have now largely agreed on, is one of the most violent geological events in the entire history of the planet. It's called the Siberian Traps. Now, traps makes it sound almost quaint. It is anything but. What happened in what is now Siberia was a volcanic eruption on a scale that is genuinely difficult to comprehend. This wasn't a single volcano. It was a colossal wound in the Earth's crust that bled lava for something like 1 million years. When it was done, it had buried an area of over 7 million square kilometers, larger than the entire continent of Australia, under layers of volcanic rock. The total volume of lava has been estimated at around 4 million cubic kilometers. For scale, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which flattened forests and killed dozens, produced about 1 cubic kilometer. The Siberian Traps produced roughly 4 million of them. It was enough to cover the entire United States in a layer of magma a kilometer deep. But, And this is the crucial part. It wasn't the lava that did the killing. The lava was terrible, but it was regional. What killed the planet was what came out of the ground along with it. Gas. Because those eruptions didn't just pour out lava, they belched staggering quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, over and over, for hundreds of thousands of years. And it gets worse, because that magma didn't just erupt cleanly. It punched up through Siberia's vast underground deposits of coal, oil and salt, cooking them and releasing even more carbon and toxic compounds into the air. The Earth had, in effect, set its own fossil fuels on fire on a planetary scale. And that's when the dominoes began to fall. Because once you start pumping that much carbon dioxide into the sky, you trigger a cascade, a chain of catastrophes, each one feeding the next. It started with heat. All that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and the planet, already warm, began to roast. Global temperatures climbed by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. The oceans, which absorb the atmosphere's heat, warmed until, in the tropics, sea temperatures may have exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Bathwater. Water that hot simply cannot support most complex life. The tropical oceans became, in places, a dead zone. And the heat led directly to the next disaster: suffocation. Because warm water holds far less dissolved oxygen than cool water. As the oceans heated, the oxygen bled out of them, and vast stretches of the sea became anoxic, starved of oxygen entirely. This is now thought to be the single biggest killer in the ocean. The marine animals didn't just cook, they suffocated, unable to breathe, dying across whole ocean basins at once. And in those dead, oxygen-free waters, a different kind of bacteria thrived, ones that produce hydrogen sulfide, the gas that smells of rotten eggs and is lethally toxic. Some researchers believe the oceans belched this poison gas up into the atmosphere, killing life on the land as well. And the carbon dioxide had one more trick. When it dissolves into seawater, it forms carbonic acid. So the oceans didn't just heat and suffocate, they acidified. And that was a death sentence for any creature that built a shell or a skeleton out of calcium carbonate. The corals, the shellfish, and so many others, because their own armor began to dissolve in the increasingly acidic water. The great reefs of the Permian collapsed and vanished, and reefs would not fully return for millions of years. Heat, suffocation, poison, acid. And on top of all of it, evidence suggests the sulfur and other gases damaged the ozone layer, letting harmful ultraviolet radiation pour down onto the land, scorching plants and mutating pollen. We actually find deformed fossil spores from this exact interval, a fingerprint of a world being irradiated from above while it burned from below. It was, in every sense, the apocalypse, attacking life from every direction at once, on land and sea, from the sky and from the deep. And this is why so few things survived. The trilobites, after nearly 300 million years, after surviving every previous catastrophe the Earth had thrown at them, did not survive this. The Great Dying is where their story ends, completely. The same for the sea scorpions and countless other groups that had defined the ancient world. An entire chapter of life's history was simply erased. And here is the number that truly captures how close we came. When you lose 96% of species, you don't just lose diversity, you lose stability. Ecosystems are webs. Pull out too many threads and the whole thing collapses, taking even more species down with it in a chain reaction. Some studies suggest that at the very lowest point, life on Earth was reduced to a tiny handful of survivor species clinging on in scattered refuges. The entire, glorious 3-billion-year-old experiment of complex life was balanced on a knife's edge, carried forward by a small and desperate few. Had those few not made it, had the dominoes fallen just a little further, it is entirely possible that Earth would have been knocked back to a planet of nothing but microbes, that the chain would have snapped, and the great story would have simply stopped. But it didn't. And that's the part I find genuinely moving. Because a few things did hold on. On land, one of the great survivors was a stocky, pig-sized, tusked plant-eater called lystrosaurus, an unglamorous, burrowing creature that in the empty world after the apocalypse became one of the most abundant land animals the planet has ever seen. For a time, this one humble survivor accounted for a huge fraction of all land life on Earth. And in the sea, and in the mud, and in the scattered pockets where conditions weren't quite lethal, other small, tough, adaptable creatures endured. And from that tiny, battered remnant, life did what it always does. It rebuilt. Though it took its time, the recovery was agonizingly slow, taking as long as 10 million years for ecosystems to become complex and stable again, far longer than after any other extinction. But rebuild it did. And here is the beautiful irony, the twist that makes this whole grim story worth telling. The world that rose from the ashes of the great dying was the world of the dinosaurs. The emptying of the planet cleared the stage. Into that void, over the following millions of years, evolved the archosaurs, the group that would give rise to the dinosaurs, the pterosaurs, and eventually the birds. Without the great dying, the reptilian dynasty that would define the next 180 million years might never have had its chance. The worst day in the history of life was also, in a strange way, the doorway to some of its greatest chapters. So what's the lesson in all this? I think it's twofold. The first is humbling. Life is not indestructible. There is a limit, and 252 million years ago, we brushed right up against it. The chain of life has held for 3.7 billion years, but it held by the narrowest of margins, and it did not have to. And the second lesson is the one I keep coming back to, because it's hard to ignore. The thing that nearly ended the world was a sudden, massive, rapid injection of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, warming the planet and acidifying the seas faster than life could adapt. That's a sentence worth reading twice. Because when scientists study the great dying today, many of them note, carefully and with some unease, that of all the catastrophes in Earth's deep past, this one, driven by rapid carbon release and runaway warming, may be the one that most resembles the direction our own world is heading. Not in scale, not yet, but in mechanism. The Earth has recovered from worse than anything we could do. Of that I have no doubt. Life will go on, with us or without us. The only real question the great dying leaves us with is which of those two we'd prefer. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep looking up.